Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on our mini webinar about lobbying. Through this presentation, we hope you can gain a better understanding about how everyday residents can engage with their policymakers on issues that directly impact them. So thanks again for joining. Before we get started, I want to introduce our speakers. Today we have Cassie Gavin, who is the Director of Governmental Affairs for the North Carolina Sierra Club. She has been a lobbyist in the North Carolina legislature since 2013 and represented over 75,000 members and supporters through her environmental work. And she continues to speak for those who are most at risk to environmental injustice within our state. We also have Britton Cleveland, who is the regional organizer for Friends of the Earth. Her background is in environmental policy, and she works diligently to engage everyday residents in North Carolina to become active participants in the policy arena. She works to build capacity through grassroots organizing to empower people to make a difference. So what are we going to be covering today? We're going to start with a review of local and state governmental structures for those who are unfamiliar. We're next going to go over the basics of lobbying, so what it's going to look like and why it's important. We'll then cover easy step-by-step instructions for residents to follow when they're mapping out how to navigate state government and legislators. We also have some tips to share with you all regarding do's and don'ts that will hopefully be helpful when you're trying to engage with your policymakers. And then lastly, we're going to do a quick role play so you guys can see what lobbying interactions would most likely look like, and then we'll follow up with some questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Britton to get started.
Hey everyone, my name is Britton, and I'm going to be talking to you about how lobbying works. And since we're talking about state-level lobbying today, I'm going to first start with an overview of North Carolina state government. And then I'm going to talk about what lobbying is useful for and why it's important. So I'll just begin by differentiating the different bodies of government that are at play, because although all of these bodies affect environmental issues and policies, it's really important to understand the differences between each of them. Understanding where their respective power stops and starts is really essential in making sure that you're targeting the correct person in your campaign, because your target is the person who has a name, and they're the only person that can give you what you want. So to get started, North Carolina government is divided into three branches: the administrative branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. The administrative branch is comprised of 10 popularly elected members, which are all led by the current governor, Roy Cooper. This is called the North Carolina Council of State, and this includes people like the Lieutenant Governor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the Treasurer, and so on. Then there are 9 cabinets also within the administrative branch, and each of these agencies have leaders that are appointed by the governor. And this is where agencies like the Department of Environmental Quality or the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Transportation, and things like that, this is where they all live, in the administrative branch. And then we have the legislative branch, which in North Carolina is called the General Assembly. It's made up of 120-member House of Representatives and the 50-member Senate. And we have the third branch of government, which is the judicial branch. And this is led by the North Carolina Supreme Court. And if you remember back to your Civics 101 class, the legislative branch is the branch that enacts the laws. The administrative branch enforces the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. So also going back to Civics 101, you'll remember that the legislative branch of government is the one that controls the purse strings, which means they have the responsibility to fund the agencies that enforce our laws, like the Department of Environmental Quality. That's why we're so often concerned with the budget and spending bills that come up, because they actually have a lot of teeth. And they can be quite complicated, and they actually need to be watched very closely. So what is your role as a constituent? You have a very important role. And the way that you play your role is usually through grassroots lobbying. And grassroots lobbying is a really strategic tactic and integral part of any campaign. You can use grassroots lobbying in the very beginning of your campaign to build relationships with your elected officials. You can also use it to gather intel on your campaign, finding out exactly where your target stands on your issue. You can also present your case and give them an opportunity to hear you out and decide if they're with you or if they're against you. This is a really important step in the beginning and definitely shouldn't be overlooked, because if you meet with your target right off the bat and you learn that they support you, then your job as a constituent is to make sure that they follow through. If they're undecided or they're not on your side at all, then this means that more grassroots lobbying is needed. More in-person meetings are needed. You'll definitely need to show your some real power in these meetings moving forward. Grassroots lobbying gives you the opportunity to fulfill this important role as constituent, because your elected officials represent you in office, and when they're making decisions, you need to let them know where you stand. Lobbying is how you do that. And nothing beats a face-to-face meeting with your elected official. And always remember that your power comes in numbers, and that's what matters the most to your elected official, because they are single-minded seekers of re-election. So don't forget to show your power in numbers. So what exactly is lobbying? By definition, it's the act of attempting to influence the actions, policies, or decisions of the officials in their daily life. It allows you to directly educate these decision makers about the issues that you care most about. It helps you identify your supporters, your opponents, and the undecided decision makers. And it's also a really important tactic in any campaign to move an elected official forward to be a champion for your cause. Or it can also help you soften or neutralize an elected official that may not be with you or totally disagrees with you. It can be accomplished in many ways. It can be accomplished by petitions. You can send letters, you can send postcards, emails, you can place phone calls to their office. But as I said earlier, nothing really beats a face-to-face meeting. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Cassie, who's going to walk you through some tips and tricks and best practices for lobbying your elected officials.
Thank you, Britton. This is Cassie Gavin. I'm going to talk about some step-by-step lobbying instructions and tips and tricks for citizens to use when lobbying elected officials. I'll focus on meeting in person with state legislators, but the same tips apply for lobbying at every level of government. I'm also going to touch on some do's and don'ts as well, but keep in mind that no matter what, just going and lobbying in general is something that's going to make a big impact, because not very many citizens do it. Your state legislators, I hear all the time, don't often hear from their constituents. So just taking the step to join the webinar and then taking the next step to do it will make an impact. The most important thing that you can do to start out is to understand your target. So get together with the folks that you may be going to meet the legislator with and do a little research. Answer questions like, what party does this person belong to? What committees do they sit on? What leadership positions do they hold? All of these questions go to what power do they have to be able to respond to your request. Some other things that might be helpful to look into before you meet with them are, what is their profession? What issues are most important to them? This helps guide a conversation with them, and it also will let you know probably what they know the most about. If their top issues are, education and healthcare, they might not be most aware of environmental issues, so you might have to bring more information with you. So most of this basic information can be found at the North Carolina General Assembly website, which there's a link to on your screen. And then the rest of this information you can really find easily by Googling the name of the legislator, looking at their Facebook page or their campaign websites. So next I'll go through some specific steps that I would recommend that you take for a successful lobbying visit. I would recommend that you have an agenda and you assign roles going in to your group, and prepare talking points and a fact sheet, and potentially bring along an article or two about your issue to leave with the legislator so that they can read it later. As far as assigning roles, I would recommend that you have a group leader who's responsible for introductions, doing a meeting overview, closing, and keeping things on track. A storyteller, that person would deliver your message, make it personal, tell a story about their life that relates to your issue. and then speak to why the legislator should act to help you. You might also have a pitcher. That person would make the ask, be prepared to respond depending on the legislator's position. So they might have to make the ask more than once, but that's okay. I'd also recommend having a recorder that someone would take notes, both for your group to look back on later and also to share with maybe your wider organization and allies afterwards, so that if you're tracking lots of different legislators' positions, you'll have those notes for posterity. And then additional people are good to have, even if they don't have speaking roles, because if you have supporting actors, that means you show strength in numbers and you show that a lot of people care in your district about this issue. So it's okay if people come but don't actually speak. Totally normal. I would suggest that you meet as a group beforehand and you know your talking points, you know why the issue is important to you, and definitely remember to say that you're a constituent. If you are, that's really important to legislators. If possible, it's always better when you go to these meetings to bring at least one constituent. That's who they're going to care about the most, because that's who can vote for them. And it's good to share as many personal and local examples of the impact of the issue you came to talk about. Those stories are more memorable than average talking points. This helps the legislator understand why they should care about your issue. And you need to know the action that you want the legislator to take. Do you want them to speak in committee about your issue when it comes up in a bill? Do you want them to file a bill? Do you want them to oppose a bill? Do you want them to, come to your local meeting and speak about an issue? So you want to have your ask and keep it simple and know that they can accomplish your ask if they want to. I'd recommend keeping your meetings short and focused. Usually you're going to get maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes if you're lucky. So you're going to need to repeat your ask both at the beginning and the end, and always allow time for the person you're meeting with to talk, both just to get to know them and to leave them space to respond. Like if you ask them, what is your position on this? Don't immediately start talking again. Leave some space for them to respond. Also, always leave good information with them. Make sure it's concise and factual. You're not going to know all the answers, but you can always get back to them with more information if they ask questions you don't know about. And you should feel free to politely control the conversation. You asked for the meeting, so it's kind of yours. Remember what you came from, and if your meeting starts to devolve off into small talk or sports talk or things like that, that's okay to do a little bit of to get to know each other, but stay focused and bring it back to where you want to go. And then after the meeting, you definitely should always follow up. You should thank the legislator with an email or a written letter, and then provide any information that you promised to provide or that you think will be useful going forward. And then after that, you should take the step of sharing the information that you learned with your organization and your allies, so that everyone can know what happened and can continue lobbying that legislator or use that information to lobby other legislators. Next, I'll talk about some do's and don'ts of lobbying. Some of these may seem obvious, but I'll state them anyway. You should always dress nicely, be clean, be on time, be polite, be very respectful of time constraints. One thing that some people forget is you should be very polite and courteous to the staff of the legislator. Often these are family members of the legislator working in their office. So it's a really bad move to be rude at all to the legislative assistants. Like I said earlier, you should never assume that a legislator knows anything about your issue. They often will not. So you should start with the basics, and then maybe you'll be surprised and they'll know a lot about it, but most likely they will not. And sometimes your target person that you would like to meet with is going to not be there, even if you had a meeting. That happens. Legislative sessions and schedules get really crazy. So don't be offended if that happens. Just go ahead and talk with the legislative assistant, leave information, and try to set up a new meeting. Always be calm and speak about the issues that impact you specifically. And if the meeting goes badly, don't get discouraged. You still started a relationship and you can keep that going. And even if they don't want to work with you on this one thing, they might work with you on something else in the future. So it's good to maintain a polite relationship. I'll pass this on now to Jessica.
Yeah, thank you. So now that we have a foundation set about lobbying, we've gone over some steps and some tips. We're next going to do a little role play to demonstrate how lobbying interaction might look like. So Cassie is going to act as our constituent and Britton will act as our representative. So with that, we can go ahead and get started.
Hello, come on in.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for seeing me, Representative Cleveland. I'm Cassie Gavin, and I'm from your district, and I'm here to talk with you about water quality. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to hear from my constituents. Tell me more about your issue, and who are you and why do you care?
Thank you for asking. I'm here to talk about House Bill 188 specifically. It's a bill that's entitled Revise Water Quality Protections, and it's sponsored by Representative Brown. You may or may not have heard of it, but it basically would roll back water quality protections for rivers and lakes. So I'm here to ask you to work against that or to vote against the bill if it comes before you.
Okay. And why is this? Why is this important to you? Do you represent an organization, or is this a personal issue?
I do not represent an organization. I'm just concerned, really, as a citizen, because I kayak on the river, I fish in the river, and tourism is so important to our community and our economy. I just think there's nothing more important than clean water, and we need to protect it and not let our protections be rolled back.
Well, that's great to hear. As you know, I'm also a really big environmentalist, and I also kayak on the rivers, and so I'm definitely with you. I actually spoke at last year's Earth Day event. They had a press conference, and I was honored to be there. But Cassie, I'm definitely hearing, from our friends in the agriculture industry that don't necessarily agree with you. They say that this provision is going to be good for them, for farmers and for industry. And as you know, my top concern is always, jobs in the economy. And I would hate to do something that would harm our friends in the agriculture industry by voting against this. Would there be a negative impact on the economy and jobs?
Well, first of all, thank you for speaking at last year's Earth Day event. That's great. I'm glad to hear that you care about the environment. I don't think that the goals of water quality protection and having a good economy are separate. I think they're one and the same, and you can have a really successful agriculture industry and have clean water. And part of how you do that is to keep important regulations like we have on the books and not roll them back. It's certainly not time to roll them back now, given that a lot of our water quality in North Carolina doesn't even meet standards set by the EPA. So I brought along an article about this, actually, with some numbers in it for you that show that clean water is good for the economy.
Thanks. I'll definitely take a look at this. Thank you so much for providing some background information, because as you know, I have so many issues that come before me and across my desk all the time, and it's just so hard to keep track. But I'll definitely take a look at this and weigh the pros and cons.
That's great. Will you be able to actually educate your colleagues about this and vote no if it comes before you?
I will definitely take a look at this. I will have, my legislative aide dig deeper into this, and I'd be happy to pass along some information to my colleagues. And I will, when we vote on this bill, I will make a reasonable decision.
Okay, well, if there's anything that I can provide to you after I go that would help your decision, I would be happy to provide that.
Great. Well, I really thank you, Cassie, for taking the time to come and talk to me about this issue. I learned a lot from you, and I look forward to seeing you when I announce my re-election campaign.
Thank you for seeing me, and I'll definitely follow up with you and check back in to get you some more information and see if you've made a decision. Thanks so much for meeting with me today.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So that's just a very basic idea of what lobbying your legislator may look like. We hope that helped your understanding, but just in case, we do have a few questions. Number one, I have, what do you do if you get to your legislator and they're not there?
Yeah, this is Cassie. That has happened to me many times, so don't feel like it's unusual and don't be offended. I recommend talking with the legislative assistant to convey your message in a brief way, leaving some information, and working with that assistant to try and set up another meeting at another time.
Great. I also have another question that popped up. It says, how do you set up a meeting?
Well, I can take that question. This is Britton. I've helped many people set up meetings. And I first tell people the best way is just to place a phone call to the office. And you may or may not get through to a live person, but leave a message. And if you're not able to get through with someone, definitely follow up with an email. And if you don't get a response, definitely don't be afraid to just stop by the office. You have every right to do so. So stop by in person. See if you can talk to someone right then and there, or see if you can set up a meeting. And you will likely get a good response by just showing up.
Great, thanks for answering that, Britton. My last question I have is, what do you do if you know that your representative has already been lobbied by the opposition?
This is Cassie. I would assume that that is the case. I would assume that your person you're meeting with has been lobbied by the opposition, and before the meeting, it would be a good idea to do some research into what the opposition is saying, and be prepared to answer questions about that if the legislator asks that.
Yeah, and I definitely, this is Britton, I'd like to add to that. When you're in your meeting, as Cassie said, definitely assume that they have gotten information from your opposition, but don't bring the opposition's talking points to your meeting. So don't bring them up proactively, because you're just repeating your opposition's talking points. So if it comes up, maybe have an idea of what the opposition has said and have some good counterpoints to that, but don't bring it up on your own.
That's awesome. Thank you both for answering those. So lastly, so for anybody that is still wondering or wants to understand more, we have attached handouts along with the webinar. And you can also explore more at the legislators at the General Assembly website. But lastly, I just wanted to thank you guys for joining. Please feel free to use any of the handouts that we have or any of the information. And we hope that you find this helpful in your future when interacting with policymakers. So thanks again.